So today is October 25th, Saturday.
25th, right?
Yep, Saturday, 2014. And I am in Narragansett, Rhode Island. And I am with Mr. John O'Hara. Thank you very much for coming and agreeing to speak again to a member of my family.
Thank you.
You were interviewed back in August by my nephew, Stephen
Right.
Greenwell Jr. And so your story of being a World War II vet was very interesting, and you have agreed to go and repeat your story and your history a little bit for me to have.
Right.
All right. Now, when were you born, John?
I was born in South Reddish, South Stockport, Manchester, England,
Wow.
in March the 20th, 1921, on Palm Sunday. First time I've ever known Palm Sunday to fall on March the 20th.
Wow.
And my father came over here in beginning of 1922 to set up. And in January 1923, my mother and I and my aunt landed in Boston. The reason we didn't go through, I was a year and 20 months old, and the reason you didn't go through Ellis Island, if you had a sponsor, you didn't need to go through there.
Okay.
You could come right in. We lived in Providence for a short time, then we came to Riverside, and I was raised in Riverside till I was about 10 years old, and then we moved to Providence. I lived in Providence, and then North Providence, and from North Providence I went into the service. Well, I went through the 20s and then the Depression, and during the Depression, I went to LaSalle Academy.
Okay. My dad went there.
Did he go there? Right. And that was back in 1937, and I was in the band. And the following year, I went into cross country, and when I was in cross country, I was on the 7-man team for LaSalle, and we won the state championship. When I was going into my final year, my father took sick. And of course, my mother says to me, "You're the oldest in the family, and there's no money coming in until your father gets well. You got to go to work." So I had to quit school. Well, I worked for International Braid, and when I worked for International Braid, I was an oiler. I worked 44 hours for $13.50. So, and then I started, my mother says, "You're getting pale looking." And she took me to the doctors, and the doctor says, "Where does he work?" And she told me. What I did was go from one room to another, the cotton room, the rayon room, and all that. He says, all that fiber, he's inhaling it. So she says, he has to have a job in the outside. I couldn't find a job on the outside. So what I did, I joined the CCC camp. So when I was in the CCC camp, I was in with three of my buddies. And then they said, when we get out, we're going to the Marines. So I called my father up and I says, my buddies are going to the Marines, I want to go with them. My father says, I went through World War I. He says, you got to be 21 on your own before you can go in on your own. He says, and you're going to have to wait till you're 21. He says, because I'm not signing for you to go in with a war in Europe. So I didn't go in. Well, when Pearl Harbor came by, I was down at the Murphy's house with all my friends. Mrs. Murphy came out and says, they just bombed Pearl Harbor. Everything went quiet. And we all looked at one another. And I said, well, we're going to have to go in. They all agreed. Every one of us went in. And I couldn't get in until March the 20th, 1942, because I was 21.
Okay.
So I went in, I went down I got up early, didn't even tell my folks, went into Providence, got examined, and the doctor looked me over and he looks down and he says, your toes are all purple. Like my cousin's a nurse. I had athlete's foot because I did a lot of running. So she had me paint them. So he says, what's that? I said, I got athlete's foot. He says, you have? go on back home. He says, I can't let you in. You'll give the Navy athletes foot. So the minute it cleared up, I went back. So when they finished examining me, this guy says, what school do you want to go to? I said, photography school. I said, I'd like to be a photographer in the Navy. Okay, puts it down. I go down to Newport, down to Cottington Point. We go through the training. And it was a very vigorous training and fast. And they took us out on rowboats and they had us rowing and all that stuff. Then one day they said, pack up, get into your blues, you're leaving. So we got ready. We packed up. I wound up at the railroad station down in Newport, and we took off. And we went the back way, and I don't even know where we were. So finally, we call one of the officers over and say, where are we going? He says, I have no idea. Everything was secret in those days. They didn't tell you a thing. Wound up at Cape Charles, Virginia, got into a boat, got into the ferry, and we rode the Hampton Roads to Newport. Well, wouldn't you know, it was a rough day and windy, and it's going, and a lot of the enlisted men were getting sick. And my buddy, one of my friends said, well, it's the first time I never took a trip at sea on the rails. So when we got to Newport, they put me on the USS William P. Biddle, attack transport. And early in the morning, they announced the names to go to the deck after we ate. When we got up on the deck, they said, you're going to school. We went down the rope ladder. We got into a landing craft. We went up the Charles River. We pull into one of the buildings, walked into it. And when I walked in, I looked around, and these are gigantic twin gray marine diesels. And I stand there looking. The instructor comes over and says, what's the matter? I said, those are the biggest cameras I've ever seen. And he laughed. He says, what'd you do? Put in for photography? I says, yeah. Welcome to the Navy. He says, he said, what did you put down where you worked? I said, the railroad. That's why you're here. Went there, and it was a fast course, but they taught us all about gray marine diesels, how they work, how they had special tubes for the salt water coming in. We learned everything there could be about it. Then we went back. In the afternoon, we got on the craft, and every afternoon we made runs on the beach at Little Creek. When we got to the beach, there was a group of men standing there, and we went there, and they said, we're instructors, and we said, we're going to teach you jiu-jitsu. So they taught us how to like say, one of the guys was about 300 pounds. He says, you're going to be able to take this guy and flip him and put him on his back. And this will never happen. Before we finished, we went through a train, and I learned to catch him by here, get him on my hip, and whoop, put him down. Once you put him down, you either come across his throat, into his ears, across his belly, a fast kill. And we said, why are we learning this? He says, when you go into battle, whether it's with the Germans or the Japanese, he says, you've got to be able, if you're cornered, you've got to be able to control, handle these people. He says, well, we don't want you fighting them, we want you killing them right off the bat. And they did a good job. They did a good job. Then one morning, we all got on the decks and the main deck, and the officer said, well, I want you to pack all your gear. He says, you're going to take a train ride. He says, where are we going? And the officer says, I have no idea. We went to Norfolk. We got on the train. We wound up in New York City. When we got to New York City, when we went to Pier 92. We got in Pier 92, and the place is packed. Bud Sweeney says, remember, you guys, he's my buddy from Pennsylvania. He says, if they want you to volunteer, don't volunteer. He says, because he says, that's a trick to get you to work. They come around and they look for volunteers, and who do you think put their hand up? Bud Sweeney. The rest of us, we didn't volunteer. He went down, and we don't know where he went. Then the rest of us, he says, okay, the rest of you come with me. We got on a bus. We went to the YMCA. While we're in the YMCA, strip naked, you're going to swim. So we got up on the diving board, and they were diving in. When I'm waiting for my turn, I'm looking, and I see this sailor with a 35 millimeter, and he's taking pictures. So I dive in, and when I come up, I went up to him, and I said, what the hell are you doing? He says, we're taking pictures for the Navy. He says, we're going to show these to the Navy as a trainer. And I says, well, did you have to wait till I got naked? So when we went back, there's Bud, and I looked at him, and his hair's about this big. They cut all his hair off. I said, what happened? He says, they got they got guys that teaching how to be barbers. He says, and I was one of their guinea pigs, and we laughed at him. We got on the USS Scott on the tech transport. We were Pier 92. We went down the coast to back to the Hampton Roads. Well, going down, this is the period when, in 42, that the submarines controlled the coast. They really control them. And going down there, we were always weary because we were open to the submarines. But the thing we really liked was the dolphins were following us, and they were leaping and leaping as though they were chasing the ship. When we got into Hampton Roads, there what looked to be about 100 transports, tech transports, all over the place. And first thing is, why is all these transports here? Well, we went down to our bunks. We slept. When we get up in the morning, there's only about 10 of us left. There's only about 10 ships left. So they announced we're going to pull out. And they announced everyone's going to get gear. So they started giving us clothing, big heavy hats, heavy coats, and that. We're going north. We're probably going to go up and invade Norway, something like that. When we got 200 miles out, they took everything off us. We looked around, and there's all the transports, battleships, carriers, everything, and with their planes. Then we were told, gentlemen, you are now in Operation Torch. We're going to Africa. We're going to land on the coast of Africa. And then and he says, on the way there, nobody goes on the deck. He says, everybody stay in where you're placed, and if we bring you on the deck, we'll bring you out when it's calm. He says, then if you go out in the nighttime and you get washed overboard, we're not stopping. He says, because when you hit that water, he says, you're going to die. It's so cold. You won't live. The only one that did it, we had George Patton's soldiers. So this is the way it worked. Oh, this is I think the old ship, the city of San Francisco. It was a cruise ship. All the cabins and all them, they were soldiers and officers and that for George Patton's. All of us that were amphibians, we were down just above the boiler rooms, and our rooms were places that used to be maybe storing stuff. And it only was big enough for 3 bunks on top of one another here, and 3 on this side, and lockers. That's all the room there was. So just before we got there, because we landed, we reached there on November the 7th, 1942. They got us all together and told us that we were going to land George Patton's soldiers on the beach, and our beach was going to be Blue Beach 2 in Fadella. So later on, after the war, I learned that we were in North Morocco, but we didn't realize that Spanish Morocco, the Canadians were landing there, and from there all the way to Tripoli were going to be the English. So we never realized that everybody was involved. So on November and they said, one thing you've got to keep in mind, you are not important. If anyone dies and you die, that's all right. Make sure those soldiers get on the beach. The next morning, we got up real early. The sun hadn't even come up. We got on the landing crafts after we ate. Got on the landing craft. We're going around, getting ready to pull up to the ship where the rope ladders was. Well, we made so much noise, the motors, that the searchlights started going in from the beach. We're looking around. They're looking for the airplanes because we sounded like airplanes coming in. Then after a while they went. Then down the ladder came the soldiers. And every one of them must have had about 100 pounds on them. Guns and everything, all that things. And they came down. And when they came down, they turn around and they'd look right through you. You could see their eyes, and it's almost as though they weren't there. And they never said a word, real quiet. So they all got into the boat. And then we started off. We went around the Scott, went by the Tascablisk, we got in our line, and then we all made a run for the beach. After a while, we started noticing splashes in the water. The shore battery was opening up on us, and then one of the shore craft on the right hand side, on the starboard side, got hit, and all you seen was smoke and that, and wood and bodies going up, and they told us, we don't stop, just keep going. They're on their own if anyone survives. So in the meantime, the cruisers, Brooklyn and Wichita, moved in and started firing back. At the same time, the paratroops had gone past them, landed, and came up behind the bunkers and captured them and quieted them down. When we got on the beach, we pulled in, all the soldiers jumped out. We go to back out. We can't back out. There was a lot of rope in the water. We called it a line. It wraps around the propeller. Can't get out. So the coxswain says, what are we going to do? So I said, you got a knife? Yeah. He hands me a knife, put it between my teeth, jump over the side, go underneath, cut the line, got it, come back, start the motor, come out. And there's two gunners, mates. By now, all we have is two gunners, the coxswain and myself. And these three guys look at me and say, hooray for Johnny Weissmuller. It's Tarzan. We pull out, we go back, and we make runs in. The next day, we come in with soldiers and supplies. And when we pull in, they get up and they run in. The same thing happens. But this time, it's rough weather. And the back of the boat is boom, boom, boom. And I said, I can't get under there. I says, the minute I go under, I'm killed. I'm dead. So while we're wondering how we're going to get out of there, the soldiers on the beach start yelling to us, get down, get down, get down. And he starts pointing towards the sun. We look towards the sun. A Messerschmitt's coming, and it's a German fighter, and it's hot, what they call hedgehogging, coming down close to the beach. So the four of us all cuddled around the engine. Now the two gunners should have been in the front, but they couldn't get up there because of the warning. So we got down, and then we felt the shaking because they hit the front of the boat. And then when we stood up after, the soldiers were saying, come on with us. I guess it was the sergeant. We stood up, and the four of us stood there for a minute, we couldn't move. We were so damn scared. It felt as though there was cement in my legs. Took a couple of seconds, and then we finally shook it loose. We ran on the beach, and the sergeant said, "Follow me." And we got up into a road, and there's all the soldiers in a line. And he said, "Okay, you 4 sailors, stay right in line. If I yell air attack, meaning the planes are coming after us, look at the side of the ditch here. It's all as it is big grass, tall grass, and that. Dive into it." And when he said dive into it, I looked at him, and he says, "What's the matter?" I says, "I'll tell you, I'm scared to death of snakes. And if I dive into that, I'm going to wind up with a black mama." And I says, "What's worse, dying with a snake or waiting for a bullet?" And he laughed. He says, "Get in line." So we marched 13 and a half miles in Casablanca. While we're marching in, alongside of us, here's a guy walking out in front. There's about 3 or 4 women behind him. Coming towards him is another guy. He's an Arab with his thing on, all the Arabs' clothes on. Behind him, he's got women. The 2 guys meet together. They hug each other, kiss each other on the cheek, pay no attention to the women, and we're looking. The hell kind of a custom is this? So we got to the pier in Casablanca, and as we're walking along, there's the great big battleship, the Jean Bart. Okay. The Jean Bart was there to stop the landing, to interfere with the landing. But the Massachusetts, the USS Massachusetts, from about 20 miles out, put a 16-inch shell right through the deck and sunk it in the harbor. So I thought that was pretty cool. We got into a boat. We went back, and now we're back on the Scott. The next morning, we make a run, and we go back, and our boat got damaged again, and we came back on another craft. We got back. November the 11th, we got back at 5:30. It went right down. Went to my locker. The PA system blast. General quarters, man your stations. We went up and we manned the station that they told us to be at. Stayed there for 3 hours, and then we learned that a German submarine had sunk one of our transports, the Joseph Hughes, had damaged the Hamilton, a destroyer, put a torpedo into it that went in right into your boiler room, and put a torpedo into a tanker called the Wisniewski. Well, after 3 hours, we got a clearing. We went back down, and Bud said, "Well, we don't have to worry now." He says, "We'll be taking off. We won't stay here after that." Next morning, November the 12th, 1942, we're in our craft. We're making landings. We come back 5:30. 5:45, we go down into our compartment. At first there were 6 of us in there, and Tom Miller says, I'm going to lunch. He went upstairs. He disappeared. And then there's 2 guys on this bunk, and over here there's 2 more guys. I walk over and I go to the locker. As I open up the locker, the lights go out, and the pressure so strong I can't breathe. I'm trying to get my breath. I can't get my breath. Next thing I know, I'm on the deck, and the locker's unhinged. Everything is quiet, black as can be. All of a sudden, I feel I'm getting wet. I'm getting soaked, and as I feel it, it's oily, and I realize it's oil mixed into it. Well, first thing you know, it's up to my waist. First thing I do is take my pants off like I was trained, and my shirt, anything at the top. All I have is my skivvies and my undershirt. And because if I'm going to swim, I can't do it. First thing you know, it's up higher, and I keep dog paddling. It seemed like an hour. Maybe it wasn't that long. First thing I know, I'm up near the overhead. So, and then I feel there's pipes. I grab one of the pipes, and it must have been leaking because hot steam hit this ear, and I let out a yell. And then I grabbed the pipes again, and first thing I know, the water's up here. So finally, I'm to the point that I'm right at the overhead. I put my mouth on the overhead, and I start to suck the air. It went over me, and I went under. I don't know what happened. I can't hear anything from any other place. Come to find out later on, the four of them were killed. So I go under, and I said a prayer. And the prayer that I said was, please God, have them break the news to my folks very gently. They're going to be devastated. And all of a sudden, my lung, I wouldn't open my mouth. I knew I was dying, and I accepted it. And I started swimming as hard as I could to go up because my lungs were on fire. I knew there was nothing to get to. The ship tilted. And when I got up there, I could breathe, and I was amazed. And so again, I reached for the pipes. Guess what? No pipes. But my hand went right through the overhead. It had blasted a hole in the overhead. Grabbed a hold of it, pulled myself up, and I just lay on that deck for a few minutes. From my head to my toes, I ached. Boy, I really ached. Then I got up, I took 3 steps, boom! There were 2 holes. And went down. And then I finally got up. So I didn't know which way to go. It's pitch black. So, and because of them holes, I got as close to the bulkhead as I could, and I felt my way all the way. Finally, when I got near the end, someone had left a lantern, so I found the way out. I got up on the main deck. I'm looking around for something to throw overboard to hang on. There's nothing. There's no life jackets. It's quiet. It's eerie. It's so quiet. I worked my way over to the side of the ship, and there's a rope ladder. So I start letting myself down, and I'm going down, and I'm thinking, I know I've been hit. I knew I got hit in the leg and here, and I know I got hit in the chest. I've been bleeding. I'm going to go in the water, in African waters where there's sharks. Oh my God. But I figured, I wish I had something to jump onto. Just as I get to the bottom, a landing craft comes up, and I fall into it. And I must have been a sight, because I had found out later, all that you could see was all the oil all over me. It must have been a sight. And I started throwing up. Now, one of the guys later on said it was black what you were throwing up, though. Well, they got me to a ship called the Dickman. It was a Coast Guard ship, and they put me in the sick bay. While I'm in the sick bay, the guy in the next bunk to me is screaming, yelling, and I go to talk to him, and he starts swearing and cursing at me, and then it went quiet. And the pharmacist's mate came over and looked at him, put a blanket over him. He looks at me, he says, he's dead. Well, before that, they put me on the table. The doctor, they cleaned me off. Then he started working on my leg. He sewed up something down here, and he did something here. Then he comes to my chest, and he looks at me, and he says, "You're one damn lucky guy." Why? I says, "Yeah, I got off the ship." He says, "I don't mean that." He says, "You got hit in the chest. If it had gone 1 inch higher, it would have severed your windpipe." And here I'm talking, I'm thinking he's saying I'm lucky for that. I got off the ship. I got in this, they put me in, when I was in the sack, and after that guy had died, I says to the boatswain, "Can I have a pencil and paper?" He says, "Why?" I says, "I want to write what happened." So he gave me an old pad and a pencil. And I lay there. Because what I remember when I was in school, we had poetry. And I was given an assignment to study Edgar Allan Poe and be able to recite it. And I loved it. I loved Edgar Allan Poe's writing. So I figured I'd write down what happened. But I remember when I was writing the poetry, that was a period that I would be completely relaxed. Because in order to take a verse, for one verse to complement another, I had to think, run the things through my mind. So I wrote what I later called the Warrior's Mind. And the first thing that I wrote was, from everyone's birth to their final demise, decisions are made, some foolish, some wise. But the decision that's harder than all of the rest is the heart-rending decision between life and death. And when I finished it, it was a long poem, I fell asleep. Well, during the night, I heard it was rough, and I heard the waves hitting the ship. And I jumped out of my bunk. And the bosun says, "What's the matter?" I says, "We got hit." He says, "That's only waves. Go back to sleep." When we got into Norfolk, we got sent home for 20 days survival leave, 30 days survival leave. When we came back, I came on the dock, went into a big hall, and all of my crew, all the guys were there. And as I walked in, Tommy Miller looks at me and says, "Where the hell did you come from?" I says, "Oh, I had a survivor's leave. I come back." He says, "You were in there." He says, "I left you in there. I saw you in there. You're dead." I says, "No, I got out." And he couldn't believe it. He says, "How come you got out and the other four didn't?" And I don't know. I don't know how it happened. I says, "It's just that through a miracle, there was no overhead." So then the officer said to me, "Your crew, all your crew is going to be sent up to Minnesota." He says, "You're going to be on shore duty, and that's where they build landing crafts, and you're going to ferry them down to New Orleans." He says, "And you'll be doing that probably for the next year." He looks at me, he says, "You come on with me." Took me in another room, and he says to me, "I found out what happened to you." He says, "How did you feel when you're coming back?" I says, "Every time a wave hit the ship, I want to jump overboard." He says, "If you don't go right back to ship, he says, you're going to be afraid of the water." He says, "You're not going to be any good to the Navy." He says, why don't you go right back to sea and see how it works out?" And I says, "I'll do it on one condition." He says, "What's that?" I says, "I'm no longer a fireman. I'm a seaman. I'm on a gun, on a main deck, and if I'm going to die, I'm going to see what's coming, and I'm going to fire back." He says to me, "Okay." Within an hour, I had papers, and I'm on the USS Alabama, a battleship. I'm on Division 10, and I'm on the anti-aircrafts. The guy did exactly what I said. Got on the Alabama, and this guy, Johnston, was the gun captain. And he came out, and he looked at me, and there was one other guy that volunteered to go back to sea, and that was Flash Rayner from North Carolina, Gordon Rayner. Flash got his name because when I first met him, he said, "My name's Gordon Rayner." I said, Flash Gordon. And it stuck with him. All through the Navy, it stuck with him. And him and I were the best of friends all through it. So I got trained on the 20 millimeters. I got trained on the 40 millimeters. And I also got trained on the catapults. We went to it was the first trip out for the Alabama. It was a new battleship, BB-60. We went to Casco Bay. We had Liberty there. Boy, was it cold. Oh, my God. Then we went to Argentia, Newfoundland. And when you looked out at Argentia, I says, "I hope we don't stay here." No trees, misty, cold. I said, the most desolate place they ever seen. First thing we know, we're pulling out, and we're in Scapa Flow, Pentland Firths. And then we start pulling up, and there's the British battleships, the carriers, and everything like that. That's when they told us, we're now part of Task Force 99. We're a combination American-British fleet. Later on, I found out that the battleships, a lot of the battleships from the British fleet were sent to the Mediterranean for Sicily, the landing in Sicily. So we were replacing them. We were on a covert operation. We had 5 destroyers with us and 2 of the newest battleships built. And we got in with them. From there, from Scapa Flow, we went to Iceland. While we were in Iceland, we went aboard, we went ashore, and we went up to the village. And one thing I was surprised at, all the houses were heated from hot springs. Imagine, in Iceland, the hot springs, all the houses had pipes to it. And then we went in and we got Danish pastry, which melted in your mouth. God, it was delicious. Then we went to the big beer hall, warm British beer. And while we're sitting there, I got talking to some of the sailors, you know, because I had a cousin. He wasn't there, but I had cousins that were in the British Navy. And one of the guys started talking. They were talking about us, what happened in England, why it never got invaded. So I'm listening, and they told a story how Hitler, after they took over Paris, how he stood on the beach and looked over at England and said, "We're going to invade England." And they also told me how he had got the admiral of Hitler got the admiral and the top general to work together, and how they never worked together because they hated one another, and as a result, they never happened. When I went back aboard ship, I wrote the poem, "The Invasion Never Made," on all the things that they told me about Hitler. And then from there, while we were there, right now I'm a seaman. And while we're there, also this craft pulls up with all our food and that. So from then we had to get crates and carry them. So Flash and I, we had to carry plates up the ladder and take it in. And Flash says, "How long is this going to take?" I says, "Flash, it's almost 6 o'clock. Don't worry, it's going to get dark." I made a mistake. At 11 o'clock, it's still light. We're in the land of the midnight sun. It's not get dark. So I always remembered that. Because when we got into the Pacific, I said to him, "You ever noticed that we carried those crates, the guys with stripes were there telling us what to do?" "Yeah, we're going to get those stripes." So when I got in the Pacific, I studied and became a gunner's mate. And I figured if I had them stripes, I'd be giving you the orders instead of carrying. Well, we left there. We went up the Denmark Straits between Greenland and Iceland into Akureyri, and then we went to Spitsbergen. And while we were in Spitsbergen, we were around there while they reinforced Spitsbergen. And while we were there, we were shadowing the Murmansk runs, waiting for the German fleet to come out to attack them. And we were going to go after that. The German fleet never came out. But what they did, they sent an air attack over. Well, when you're in the Arctic, it is misty, cloudy, then it clears up. Within a couple of hours, it's misty, cloudy, so they kept coming over. But the thing is, we only lost one Liberty ship. While it kept coming over, we're at our guns. We can't leave our guns. For 13 straight hours, I stood at that gun. It was a 40 millimeter, and I stood there. It was a loader, and I was cold. My God, I was never so cold in my life. We had a mask over a hat over a cotton hat or whatever it is, 2 slits nothing else. So your nose and ears wouldn't freeze. Well, but aboard ship, we had Bob Feller, the Cleveland pitcher who was a Hall of Famer later on. And he was our athletic instructor. He was the chief petty officer. He was in very good with the communications. And after the attack, he got them to send a notice, a dispatch to the Chicago Tribune that he had just gone through a 13-hour air attack. The next morning, we're all lined up. Along comes Lieutenant Commander Kirkpatrick, walks over to Bob Feller and says, "You're just an athletic instructor. Those stripes what you have on there are because you're a ball player." And he says, "You don't know what you did?" He says, "What?" He says, you broke the silence." He says, "They're so ripping that you let the word out that the American ships are up here with the British ships. This is a covert operation." So right away, we're heading back to the Panama Canal. We get into the Panama Canal, and as soon as we get out of it, of course, we go into the shellback thing, where if you're a pollywog, they dunk you, they put oil on you, they send you through the paddling and all that stuff, and you become a shellback. Well, we're going across the Arctic Circle, but Blue knows. Being a shellback, you're in another royal order, and then when you go over the 80th meridian, you're a golden dragon. So when we finished that, we went to the New Hebrides Islands. While we're there, they took our old radar down and put all brand new radar on our ship. We were supposed to go to Pearl Harbor, and the captain says, "No, we'll stay here and have it done here, and we'll have these other ships that have mechanics and that put the thing up." And after we left there, from then on, that's when I took the exam, and I became a gunner's mate 3rd class. When I became a gunner's mate 3rd class, I had been on the 20 millimeters. I had worked. I had been in the 40s, the 20s, and in the catapults. Now I am in charge of 40 millimeter, Quad 8. And one of the first operations we went in was the Gilbert Islands. After the Gilbert Islands, we went into the Marshall Islands. And when we went into the Marshall Islands, it's pitch black. We had bombarded them when it was later. Now it's pitch black. They're looking for the carriers. The planes kept coming over looking for the carriers. And of course, it's the battleships that open up and draw the fire to them. And in the middle of the battle, I'm standing there. I feel this on my leg, they're pulling my pants leg. I look down, and the loader says to me, "We're in trouble." I says, "What's the matter?" "We can't get any more shells." "Why not?" I take my hat off, take off my phones, jump off. I says, "What's the trouble?" He says, "I can't get you any more ammunition." "Why not?" He says, "The ammunition locker, it's on fire." So I said, I ran over, I opened it up, and there's a ring of fire in there. Sawdust. It was all on fire. I get back in, I close it because I don't want any light going out. I stamp it all out. First thing I did was take all the cans and push them back. Then I stamp it all out. And when I finished, I picked the can up, opened the hatch, came out, put the second can up, and I said to the loaders, "Now you've got it." Who's standing there? Brennan, 20-year veteran, come over to me and says to me, "Oh, Harry, you're a damn fool." I said, "Why?" He says, "You went in," he says, "Feel the can." I feel it. I says, "Yeah, it's warm." He says, "Don't you realize that thing was ready to blow up?" I says, "No." And for the first time I realized, I never even realized what I did. And then I know what happened. Before you go into battle, just before you go into battle, it's anxiety. You don't know what's going to happen, and you get uptight. From the time the gun first shot is fired till all clear, you do everything mechanically. The only thing you do is what you were trained. You do everything you do. When I got off there, my mind was no more on an explosion or anything like that, or getting killed. The only thing I was thinking about, I've got to have ammunition to shoot the gun. So I got back on, and one of the petty officers there said to me, "Be sure you report it." And he says, "You're lucky." He says, "You're lucky, bastard. You'll get a medal." So I got in. I put the things on, and before I did it, I thought, I got off that ship, and I was pretty damn lucky. I got off that ship because God gave me a gift. He got me off there. I look back, and here are the four kids, the youngest ones we have. I don't think any of them were over in their 20s. If I report that, it's a general court-martial. These guys are going to get a general court-martial. It's going to ruin their life. And they could even get executed for what they did. They could. It's right in the rules. It's so serious that they could actually go to prison and be shot for what they did. Because they let a fire happen with smoking, which they shouldn't have. It's going to ruin their life. And I didn't report it. When I finished, I got off and I said, "Did you report it?" I said, "No, I couldn't." "You damn fool, you got a medal. Why didn't you do it?" I don't know. If it had happened before that torpedoing, I might have done it. I might have done it. But now I had a different outlook on these guys. I no longer looked at them as just sailors and that. These are my comrades. These are the guys that I'm working with. I can't do it. I just can't do it. So I never reported it. And then after that, Bob Feller at that time was in charge of the radars, because the radar control, unlike it used to be, we used to do it all manually. The radar would track the plane, and we'd fire from the radar. So I said to Lieutenant Kirkpatrick, how do I get a job like that? Then I'm in full control. He says, "You got to be a gun captain." Went right back to the books, studied, came the gun captain. Well, on any aircraft, you're a gun captain second class, as high as you can go. You have to be on a 5-inch 38 mount, or in the turrets, the 16-inch turrets, to become first class. So I was a second class on that. Bob Feller gets after what happened, he got transferred back to the States. I got his job, so then I'm in full control. From then on, we never stopped. We did all the islands, Hollandia, everything like that, and we finally wound up in the Mariana Islands. When we were in the Mariana Islands, we had Tinian, Saipan, and Guam, and we bombarded it. While we were after the bombardment, we're standing on the deck, and these bugs came by, and they must have been about that size. And when they hit you, you knew it. And it was a whole swarm of them. We ran inside the superstructure, and after a while it was clear, we went out. I never did find out what they were. Never found out what those things were. And then we patrolled up and down, and then the next day in the morning, we got word that our planes were getting ready because the Japanese would be coming back to attack us from Tokyo. Well, in the meantime, the radar is doing it. Then the Alabama radar reported bogies coming out in that direction. Michener looks around and we're now in the Fifth Fleet. Admiral Michener didn't buy it, because no other one reported it. 5 minutes later, we gave the warning again. This time, he takes it serious, and he sends his plane out. And we found out that our radar picked up the bogies coming out of Japan 1/2 hour before any other ship. It was that new radar, I guess. And because of that, the radar, the guy in charge of the radar got a Silver Star, and we got a commendation for our ship for that. We sent all of our planes out. It was called the Great Turkey Shoot. And they caught the planes coming before they even got to the fleet. And as a result, they fought all day long, right into the night. Now they tell me about 400 planes came out. At the end of the day, there were less than 30 planes in the Japanese force got back to Japan. Then the train, now our planes are coming back. It's dusk, now it's dark. Everything is black. Mark Mishner, ordered every one of his carriers to lighten up. And the planes coming back, they were exhausted, they were running out of fuel, but they were able to land. A lot of them landed. We lost a lot, but a lot of them landed. And I had such respect for that man that he would do that to save these guys coming back. We saved a lot of planes. And the next morning, all of the battleships and everything were going around the islands, and even the battleship has line cutters for mines. And when we cut a mine, our Marines, because we always had Marines on a battleship, were on the deck firing at them and exploding them, and we're watching these things explode. In the distance, we see this big line of brown bags going by, and I said to the officer, "What's them, garbage bags?" He says, "No, those." He says, "You know the brown jumpsuits that the Japanese wear?" I said, "Yeah." He says, "Those are bloated bodies, and they're all bloated up and they're floating by. It's a sight you wouldn't believe." After that, we got word that we're going to refuel, and while we're refueling, the hose are coming loose, and it's whipping around. It's whipping around the sea, and the officer said, "I guess we're having a tropical disturbance." Brennan again said, "No, you're not. You're having a tornado. You're having a typhoon." And by God, he was right. It was Typhoon Phobra. But by that time, Halsey had got word that the Japanese fleet had split into 4 units. And one of them was coming down the San Bernardino Straits to interfere with the Leahy landings. We were ordered back. Well, instead of going around the typhoon, we went right through the center of it. It was my turn for being on watch, and it had to be up in the superstructure. And when I was in the superstructure, I watched the front of that ship, the bow, go completely underwater, come up, and we rolled over, and I swear we went over 70 degrees. Then we went over the other way. Later on, I found out that two destroyer escorts, which are smaller than destroyers, got caught in what they call a trance. A trance is, during these typhoons, the water comes up like this. If a small ship, gets caught into it, tips them over. 2 of the destroyer escorts got turned over. We lost 800 men. The ships on the carriers that had all their planes on the deck, they all got washed off. And the Chicago, the front of the bow was completely caved in. That was the strength of it. When we finished, we went on deck, and there is one of our boats laying right in the middle of one of the guns, all ripped. And then we got everything straightened out, and we're off the coast of Leahy, And MacArthur sent word to Halsey, stay there. Corrida's coming down the St. Bernardino Straits. But he hadn't actually got there. And Halsey says to his carriers, get your planes over there. So the planes went over and they spotted him. And they attacked him. Now these, all of these three fleets that are there, one under Corrida, one under Shima, one under Mushimura, there's no carriers. Mm-hmm. They're all battleships, cruisers, and destroyers. But in Corrida, he's got the biggest one. Admiral Corrida's got the biggest one. And he hadn't reached the straits yet. The ship he was on was the Armada, the largest battleship in the world with 18-inch guns. All the rest of us had 16. And the Mishushi, which was the second largest battleship in the world. The planes came over and sunk the Mishushi, sunk the cruisers, sunk destroyers, turned them around and followed them 30 miles back. Then said to Halsey, that fleet has been turned around and is heading back to looks like South China Seas. Halsey gets word that Ozara is coming from Japan. The northern fleet is off the Cape of Engengo, off the northern part of the Philippines. He turns around, he says, we're going after him. And boom, we went up there. We went up there as though we were in motorboats. We flew flying. We got there at dawn, and it was a yellowish cast, and it was rough weather, and all of a sudden the planes start coming. And surprisingly, they're all coming in low. And we're firing at them. And while we're firing at them, we get an emergency call from the destroyers on the other end saying, raise your fire, raise your fire. The Japs are coming in low, so we fire and hit our own ships. This is what they were doing. And so we started firing higher. So, and then while I have my earphones on, I hear, look straight up. Put your guns straight up in the air. And way up, you could just see a little dot. It's a kamikaze. Mm-hmm. It's diving on us. And we had our guns straight up in the air. And all the guns we had were firing straight up. And we're holding our breath. Because if that hits the deck, any place, we're all gone. Mm-hmm. We know it. And the ship, at the last minute, turns to starboard. And about 10 feet off the stern, it crashes into the sea. And then we got an all clear. And when we got an all clear, every one of my men never said a word. I looked at some of them, and they were like glassy eyes, and their lips were moving, and I figured to myself, they're like me, they've said a prayer. And we did everything we did from then on, we did in silence. We were scared to death, every one of us, because we thought that was the end of it. And the next day, over Tokyo radio, and anyone that was in the Pacific in that area would have heard Tokyo Road say, the people in Japan are dancing in the street. We have a kamikaze has just sunk the mighty USS Alabama. And we knew that when that guy missed, he'd already given the word that he was coming down. They don't know that he's crashed into the sea. So while we're there, Halsey gets word that Corrida has turned around and is coming back, and he's coming in and he's attacking the 7th Fleet in Leahy Gulf. So he turns around and he sends, Halsey gets a hold of John Sidney Kane. Mm-hmm. You know John Kane? It's his grandfather.
Okay.
John Sidney Kane the first. And he brings us back to Leahy Gulf, our task force. And while we're flying back there, as fast as we can, Corrida turns around and heads out. But in the meantime of all of that, Corrida came by, and when Corrida came in, he sees the fleet. He thinks it's the 3rd Fleet. It's the third. It's the Seventh Fleet. All as they have, the carriers they have are converted carriers, the small carriers, and he sees them and he thinks that they're our fleet. The only ones protecting them are destroyers, three destroyers, and a destroyer escort, and the Samuel. The Samuel, I think it was, and then there's the Johnston, the Hoyle, and the Herman. These are the destroyers. The Johnston, the destroyer, attacks the battleships and the cruisers, goes running at them, and he goes after a cruiser, and as the cruiser fires, when he sees a splash, he heads for that spot. He sinks the cruiser and he sinks the destroyer, and while he's doing that, off in the distance, a Japanese battleship blows off his conning tower. The only thing he can run it from is from the rear. So the admiral, from the captain, runs to the rear and runs it from the. He's only got one 5-inch gun working, and he's going straight at it, and they blow the whole ship right up. And then, when the Hoyle sees this, and the Hoyle and the Herman come flying for it, and so the Herman does the same thing, and the Hoyle gets shot down. Here's the small little Samuel Johnson. No, I think it was Samuels. Maybe that was it. This is half the size of a destroyer. He attacks them, and he gets sunk. After the war, I wrote a poem called The Three Davids, all about these three ships that took on Corita's ship. But the only ships sunk by them, they shelled, but they didn't sink any. From the land, kamikazes came in and sunk the Lou, the St. Lou and stuff like that. And of course, they lost a lot of men with those three things. And then Corita comes in. By that time, we're coming back, and Corita turns around and takes off. In the meantime, oh, by the way, everything was under Admiral Toyota. And Toyota had given orders, no communication, so they won't know where we are. Well, he's got Mishimura coming out of Borneo. That's where Corita came from, Borneo. He was the center fleet. Now we got the Southern Fleet coming out of Borneo by Mishimura, the oldest one they had. And when he's coming down the lower part, they send the torpedo boats attack him. Of course, he sinks a lot of torpedo boats. Gets by them, the destroyers attack him. He sinks some of our destroyers. Then he gets into clear, and he figures he's home clear, and he's all ready to come up from the lower part of Samar to come into the Leahy Gulf. And as he gets close enough, line 6 battleships from all of them were in Pearl Harbor in the bombing. All the old battleships of the 7th Fleet with 14-inch guns all open up at the same time, and one of his battleships goes zoop, he's sunk, and they damage the destroyer, and then there's another ship that's half sunk. Mishimura turns around and takes off. It was no part of it. He no sooner had disappeared, along comes Shima, the youngest admiral they had, and he comes in, and when he comes in, he sees the parts of these ships that are sinking, and in his rush, he turns around and crashes into one of them and heads out. He got out of there. He wanted no part of it. So the Battle of the Philippine Sea was written in 4 parts. After the war, I wrote the Battle of the Philippine Sea, and I wrote it exactly the way it happened and named all the battles one after the other. And then we got assigned to running up and down the coast of Japan. And we were going up and down the coast of Japan and bombarding it. And this is in just before September, the end of August in 1945. As we're going up, down, hitting all the major industrial cities. Before that, and I'll have to go back to tell you this, Yamamoto, the top carrier, when he was on this ship, after it happened, he says to the Admiralty, we've made a big mistake, we've woke a sleeping giant. He got the Admiralty, convinced the Admiralty, let's build 400 submarines. Two-man submarine, the I-58 that sunk the Indianapolis, and the I-400, which is 400 tons, which has a figure eight on the front, so for steadiness, a hangar, 3 planes, seaplanes that fold, the wings folded in, they could fold them up. Each one of those planes carried an 800 millimeter bomb, and you put them in. The whole thing about them was, when they came out, they would be on the coast of Los Angeles, San Francisco, Washington, New York, Philadelphia. You send the plane in, drop the bomb, come back, fold those wings, boom, you go in the water, they won't have to find you. Well, they started building them. But the one thing the Japanese never learned, we broke the Japanese code, and they never knew it. We're listening in, and we hear Yamamoto, not us, the security. You hear Yamamoto talking to truck. That's what they call the Gibraltar of the Pacific. I'm coming in for an examination. I'm going to inspect you. Well, by the time he got there, our planes, our Wildcats, at, let's see, no, yeah, it would have been the Wildcats in that thing, because later on it's the later on they changed the name. I'm forgetting the name of it. Well, anyway, they were waiting for him. They shot him down, and he was killed. Soon after that, the Admiralty stopped building because Yamamoto was dead. They stopped building the submarines. They didn't build them anymore. Well, after the Marianas, and they had lost their fleet, they started building them. Then they had all these big submarines. They had 2 great big diesels. They were able to go around the Earth 1.5 times without refueling. They could live under the water. They're the model for the nuclear subs today. And they got them all ready. They got all of the ones that they had. They sent them through the Red Sea into the Atlantic Ocean, off the coast of the Panama Canal, and the planes were ready. All the planes were ready to take different parts, and with their 800-pound millimeter bomb, crash into different sections and completely destroy the Panama Canal. And just before they launched them, they got an urgent call from Japan. We're being bombarded by the Third Fleet. Get back here as soon as you can. They headed back. Before they got back, the war was over. And then after the war, they were all turned over to the Americans. And what the Americans did, they went aboard them, and they were shocked at how well they were built, and how efficient they were, and so while they were examining them, Russia hears about it, and Russia asked permission to inspect them. They took every one of them off the coast of southern Japan and sunk every one of them. They're all there today, all sunk off the coast of Japan, so the Russians couldn't see them. In the meantime, Hirohito, after the two, first it was Nagasaki, and then it was Hiroshima, and the bombs were dropped. Little boy and fat lady, I think, there's something like that.
Fat man.
And they were dropped. he decided he couldn't go on with this anymore. So he made a tape, and on the tape, he declares, we are unconditionally surrendering to meet all the terms. Took the tape, gave it to his aides, and says, protect this, hide it. So they did. In the meantime, they put the word out to the Army that we are now going to surrender. And the Hirohito is going to announce it. So I knew it. You're well over the hour. So what happened? Hirohito was in his castle. The captain of the army, the rebel, with the lieutenants and that, went into the office, and there sat the commanding officer, the CEO, and they said, "We're not surrendering. We're going to keep fighting." And he says, "You're going to surrender." The CEO says, "You'll either surrender or I'll court-martial you." So the captain took out his gun and shot him. Then they went in, and they went into all through the palace, and they ripped it apart looking for that tape. And anyone that got in the way, they killed them. In the meantime, the head of the whole army, the top admiral, sent a message to these guys: "Give yourself up. You're all being court-martialed." They were so distraught, they committed hara-kiri to kill themselves. In the meantime, after that, they took the tape and they played it. And when they played it, and then the war was over. And by that time, after the war, we came back and we were operating with the Enterprise, and the war's all over, and that we were making maneuvers. And while we were with the Enterprise, we were where Trios is over here. We were that far off the Enterprise when we saw a lone kamikaze go down the elevator shack, and we saw this great big black and red smoke go into the air, and you could see it looked like wood and everything going up. War's all over. Well, the next thing we did, we all got together, and in the dead of night, we went into Tokyo Bay. And when we went into Tokyo Bay, we went to sleep. When we get up in the morning, it's misty. The only thing you can see is Mount Fujiyama above all the clouds. And my God, what a feeling that is, looking up, a mountain hanging in the air. And also, what we did, we had a launch, and the guns in the launch had Thompson machine guns, and they were going around the ships because we had word that Japanese were swimming out with loaded with dynamite on them, and they attach themselves and blow up the side of the ship. Well, that never happened, but we used that as a precaution. So I was off the here's the Missouri. And do you know what we call the Missouri?
Nope.
The Big Virgin. It was the last thing to come out. The last ship to come out. The ship they should have had the honors was the Enterprise. The Enterprise wound up with 21 battle stars, was in more action than any other ship in the Navy. That's the ship that should have had it. But Harry Truman came from Missouri, so that was his ship. The Missouri is the signing of the peace treaty. Okay. I was sitting on the fantail of the Alabama, and I was looking at it, and I was thinking that people that I had talked to, before the war started, and how many people were willing to give up rather than go to war, and kind of struck me. And I wrote a poem called "Our Given Rights," and about why we should fight and things like that. One of the things that one of the survivors of Palawan prison, there's an island on the west side of the Philippines. It's called Palawan, and I remember talking to him, and he was one of them that was put in a liberty ship of trade of a tanker or something, a ship, and they put them in the hole so tight they couldn't sit down, and they took all the prisoners and put them in these type of ships, and as they were going to Japan, well, we'd see them and sink them. We didn't know them. We thought they were Japanese ships. The ones that landed in Japan were put in the prisoner camps in Japan. But the ones at the end of the war, the ones that couldn't stand up or were too sick to walk, were put into a great big pit. And then they covered them with oil and they burned them alive. A lot of people don't know that story. There was a lot of stories that people never heard about. And the Russians were so determined that they had asked permission if they could be in the invasion fleet. When we were off the coast of Japan, our lieutenant commander was talking to us, and he said that we were softening them up. He says, in the early months of 1946, he says, we're going to have an invasion of Japan. He says, by that time, we'll have everybody from Europe, that's in Europe now, over here. He says, and probably even the Russians. And he says, we are going to invade Japan. And he says, I want to tell you right now, he says, a lot of you are not going to go through with it. Not going to be here when it's over. He says, I think this will be the biggest bloodbath in history. He says, we're going up against people that'll die before they quit. He says, and it'll be a lot of people are really going to die. And the atomic bomb stopped it. But then there was an argument after the war. Was it really the atomic bomb that stopped the war? Or was it the story that Russia was going to be part of it? Because the Russians had a real feeling to go in there because of what happened in Port Arthur during 19, in around there, when the Japanese went in there and sunk the ships in Port Arthur, Russian ships, and they wanted so bad to be part of that. And they said, so after the war, a lot of Japanese said they think the reason they ended the war was because they didn't want the Russians. But another part says no, it was actually the atomic bomb that did it. After the war, I often wondered why the Japanese were so willing to die. They wouldn't give up, they wanted to die. So what I did was, I used to go to the libraries and I got books on Shintoism and I studied it and I also read about the samurais and found out that the Japanese, Shintoism isn't like the real religion there. Buddhism is. What Shintoism is, what the ancestors had, is they believe that the sun goddess and the king, the god of thunder, got married, and they had a little boy called Jimotento. And when Jimotento grew up, they came to a point they were going to send someone down into Japan, and it was going to be the goddess of the sun's brother, but he had committed like sins against their own people, and anyway, he was on the outs. So they sent down Jimotento, and they claimed Jimotento came down and landed among them and controlled the little people, the vicious little people. And from then on, every emperor has claimed to be related to him. So that when you got to World War II, they looked at him as being holy. But another part of Shintoism was, it got mixed up with the samurais. And the samurais had the ones that they'll die before they'll surrender. And they got that worked in to that. Well, what happened when they wiped out the Japanese Air Force They were desperate. So what they had to do, they had to come up with a new plan. So what they did, they trained all these young pilots only to fly, not how to fight, only to fly. Load and put in the plane all dynamite and all, all the explosives. And all as they had to do was dive into ships and blow them up. And what they did, they named them kamikaze. Kami is the wind. Kazi are all the gods, because the gods in Shintoism are men and women, and they're called kamis. And so with having the wind and the gods, you got the holy winds, and that's how that came into it. And what they used to do with these young ones, they put the banners around their head, and what they would do, give them sake to drink, and then they would go up and they would crash into it to go glorious death, a glorious death. And that's where that kamikaze came from. Now, when the war ended, after the war ended, we discovered that they had taken the Zero planes and put jet motors in them, and they were going to use them. They also had drones planes that they were going to use to dive into the ships and blow them up. They had a lot of things coming up. And we're dealing with the Japanese. I found out that the Japanese were not inventors, but they were the type that would take your invention and improve on it. And this is what they did. And they proved it with automobiles.
Yeah.
They didn't invent the automobile. They picked the brain of someone else. And it's amazing being over there how much you picked up about who the Japanese really were. And one of the things I learned too is things that happen, and Hollywood got a hold of them, and they ruined them because they try to make them look glamorous. You would have in a scene where the actors would bring down a plane and they'd stop and they'd cheer. When you're in battle, you're not cheering. You're in a state of fog. Your mind has only one thing on, is not only bringing down those planes and winning, but staying alive. And you don't have time for all this stuff. And another thing that bothered me, this new movie that came out about the submarine and how Americans destroyers went over there and sunk the ship and submarine and saved the cipher. Okay. That's a lie. That isn't what happened. What happened was, and it was the turning point in 1943 of the fights with the submarines. What happened was the British destroyer, the Bulldog, along with a corvette, were trailing these subs. And when the subs, they had transports there, and they went about. And when the submarine came up, he pointed it right at the ships, fired 3 torpedoes. 2 went out and sunk ships. The 3rd one got stuck in the tubes. Well, what they do after they fire, the water comes in and cleans them out and that. But you got this one here, and you can't do it. So they can't dive. They can't dive deep because they've got this tube in there. They've got this torpedo. So the captain of the submarine says to all of the mechanics, get down there and see if you can fix it and get it out. Well, when they got down in there, poison gas was coming up. It killed them all. Now they're sinking, and they're not sure what's going to happen. And they can't dive because on the instruments they've got, it's not showing whether they're diving or sinking. So the water's coming up. So the captain of the ship ordered everybody off. They got on a raft. They went away. Along comes the Bulldog, because when they went under, as far as they could go, the Corvette and the Bulldog were sending down canisters and blowing them up, and it was leaking. And so as it was filling with water, the landing crew from the Bulldog went in. They took all the records that were there, brought them out, and they brought the decipher out. And when they brought the decipher out, they shared it with the Americans. And from then on, they could tell when where a submarine was, because the submarines would contact Germany, and Germany is talking to them, and well, we're going to be at altitude so much, and so we would be waiting for them. And in 1933, we started wiping out the German fleet. The Germans never knew about it. Now, two of the greatest things in World War II was that we had broke the Japanese code. We never and the people with classified information never told you about it. We broke the German code. Two countries knew about it. We never let anyone else know about it. So Germany never found out about it. We had the Manhattan Project, and that was really classified. So much, though, that Truman, when he became president, learned about it for the first time, but people had the classified information and never released it. So therefore, everything was kept really secret. A reason I bring that out is when Snowden went and took that classified information and spread it out, what would have happened if he was in World War II and had the word that we had, that we were listening in on Germany and Japan, and that we had all these codes, and that we had the atomic bombs, and he takes this attitude that people should know, we may not have won the war. So recently, I read an article where somebody wants to put him up for the Nobel Prize. I want to put him up for a firing squad because he has hurt this country. He set us back in going after the terrorists because what they were doing. And when they say, oh my God, you're listening in on Germany, I got news for you. Germany's listening in on us. You're listening in on France. I got news for you. They're listening in on us. All you did was tell them what we're doing. So one thing is, with classified information, when you take an oath that you will not release it, then I think you should not release it. My God, you shoot a guy for falling asleep on duty. What would you do to a guy that gives away your country? And if you put him up for the Nobel Prize, then you better put Benedict Arnold up too, because he did about the same thing. So I can't see it. So I don't know what else I can tell you. I also wrote, I also learned that by writing poetry, I can really control myself. I can really control myself.
Well, I was going to say, you've mentioned...
At the end of the war, I wound up with 70 poems. Had them in a notebook, never bothered with them. When my wife died in 2004, I started volunteering. I made a commitment to my dead wife. 55 years together, best thing that ever happened to me in my life. I did what she did, except in a different way. My wife was a good sewer. She loved sewing. Everything I bought for her was sewing machines and stuff like that. She used to make these bedspreads and blankets, all different colors, and everything she made, she donated to places that took care of orphan kids that had no families and that. And she never accepted a penny from them. She gave them away. So what I did, I volunteer, and everything I do free. And then one of my volunteerings is talking to children, the high schools about it. The last group I talked to, I've talked this year for over 1,000 high school kids. One of the things I did, I talked to the leisure learning group, senior learning group, and when I finished, they gave me a check for $75. I had the check made out to the veterans, a group that helps veterans, and gave it to them. And the woman said, why? I said, because I made a commitment. I won't accept any money. I do it because this is my gift to my dead wife, and it's my gift to my country. And that's the way I feel about it. And so, going back to the book, I showed Steve Jennings, who was AARP Associate Director, and he looked at it, he asked if he could read it, and when he read it, he says to me, "My God, why are you hiding this?" I said, "It's only my thoughts." He says, "John, these poems," he says, "people should know about them." We took the poems and we put them on the computer. We got people to edit them and that. We put them into an album, and also in the album are stories of the war, and we donated it to the War Library in Newport. And there's another one in the Veterans Home, and in it is all the thing, and it's that way. And I've also, the ones that have the book is Jack Reed, White House, Kennedy. They all got a book, and every book I give away, I've never charged a cent for. So I don't know what else to go into.
Well, I know that you've mentioned in the past that you dealt with a little bit, it didn't have the name post-traumatic stress at that time. It was shell shock.
Oh, yes.
And so that is important, I think, especially with our veterans coming back from...
Okay, you'll see more of that today than you would in World War II. And we, by the way, we didn't even know what the word was in World War II. It was shell shock. It was just shell shock. What I learned it from an old timer. He says to me, "John, you ever take a balloon and blow it?" Because I said to him, "My God, I can't sleep, I can't sleep." He says, "You ever take a balloon and blow it up?" I said, "Yeah." He says, what happens when you let it go?" So it goes back to its original size. He says, "What happens when you keep blowing it, blowing and blowing?" He says, "It explodes." He says, "That's what happens to your body." He says, "You get all this in yourself, and you keep it in there and keep it in there, and it's eating away at you. Get away, find a way to get rid of it." So what I learned by writing about it in poetry, I not only settled down, but I would get rid of it. I also learned another thing. Don't worry about tomorrow. Wait till it gets there. Worry about today. And always look at life this way. Material things can be replaced. Your body can't. So, one day, my wife says to me, she's crying, she says, "We got hit hard with income tax. How are we going to pay for it?" So I went to the bank and I paid, and she says, "It's going to take us a long time to replace it." I said, "Shirley, it's money. We can get more money. We don't worry about it." And then she says to me one day, "John, I get so mad. I worry about the bills and you never worry about them." And I says, "If I worry about them, will you guarantee me they'll get paid?" She says, "Of course not." I says, "Then why worry about it?" I says, "Look at life this way. Live today and do the things you're supposed to. And if you feel yourself getting worked up, just say to yourself, it's not worth it. It's not worth it, and get it out of you." And that's the way I live. When I went to an operation for lymph gland cancer, they broke my neck. They operated for 10 hours. The doctor says to me, "I want you to know you may not come out of this." And I said to him, "I don't want to know about it. Operate." He says, "Aren't you the least bit concerned?" I says, "No, because if I die, there's nothing I can do about it, so I'm not going to worry about it." And I do that today. I don't worry about a thing. And my kid says to me, Dude, you should be worried about this." I said, "Why?" One day, I lost about $50. I don't know what happened. I must have dropped it. I didn't worry about it. I looked at it. Well, take me a little time. I'll win. I'll get that back pretty soon. So why should I worry about what I lost when I can always get it back? So that's the way I look at it. And a lot of sailors had a way of doing it. I had a buddy that used to play music and listen to it and go to sleep listening to the music. He says it calmed him down. I had another buddy that used to fall down and do exercise, get himself all worked up doing exercise. Others used to play cards and get their mind off it. But the guys that don't talk about it, they keep it inside. When I talk to the high school kids, the one thing I say to them, have you got somebody you don't like yet? is somebody that you really dislike, yeah. And what do? He says, well, I hate him. I hate him. I says, and what are you doing? You're taking your body and you're really grinding yourself on hate. And the person you hate is laughing at you because they don't even know what you're doing. They don't care. They walk away. So take this attitude. If you can't get along with somebody, walk away. Get along with somebody else. I says, don't take it. If your ball game is losing, just look at it this way. Well, they're losing. They'll win next time. If you take that attitude in life, you'll come out of it. Every time I start to get worked up, I think about something different, something that is completely different. But I always learned anything I got out of me, I felt good. Mm-hmm. I was yesterday at a session where they were talking, and one part of it was Rhode Island University on the learning program, and they asked me if I'll come up and talk to them. And during the thing, I said, in these lectures that you give, I says, are they all people that have studied, that are history teachers and things like that? They said, oh no, we have just about everyone. So I says, the reason I say it, I says, a lot of time someone will get up there that's only read about it and come to find out they got the whole story mixed up. Mm-hmm. And I tell them that one of the things that happened in the Pacific, we were on maneuvers. The USS Washington was the flagship going around. The Indiana misread the flags and they crashed into each other, and about 8 or 10 sailors were killed. When the story came back a month later, the newspapers in America were saying that the Indiana and the Washington were badly damaged in the Japanese battle. We were hundreds of miles away from the Japanese. It didn't happen that way, and that's what people do. They take it and they fit it into where they want it. And just like Hollywood changed who actually got the Dakota and took it away from the Americans and gave it the British and gave it to the Americans. But the kids in school, when they say it, they think when you tell them the British did it, you're lying. Because, oh no, because the movie said it this way. But the movies don't always get it right. They don't always get it right. Like, I had one time someone says to me, isn't it wonderful that we had a president that served in the service and saw all that action? I said, who's that? He said, Ronald Reagan. I said, where did you get that from? I said, Ronald Reagan was made a lieutenant in the Army to make movie pictures in Hollywood. He never left Hollywood. I said, but I see how people take something and they twist it all around. And the same thing with the presidents. I hear people talking about the presidents of the United States, and I study. That's one of the things I do to keep my mind clear. Study the presidents, and I listen to the stories, and there's nothing like what actually happened. Like I asked one group of students, what president put more land in America than any other president? And everyone, all of them said, Thomas Jefferson with the Louisiana Purchase. I says, no, the 11th president of the United States, James Knox Polk. He put more land in America than any other one. I says, you don't even know who he is. They said, yeah, we didn't even know he was president. I says, see how mixed up you can get? See how mixed up you can get by not really knowing the facts. Mm-hmm. So, is there anything else?
What would you, knowing that we have a lot of soldiers that have come back from the Middle East right now and from the wars that have been going on there, what would be your advice to them about coming back and reintegrating into society after seeing all that they've seen and how to deal with their stress?
Well, what I would tell them is to find a way to get out of it. Mm-hmm. And the way to get out of it is to get it out of their system, and try to get their mind on other things and get away from it. Mm-hmm. You know, that's another subject that they came back and they said they really got on the back of the veterans' hospitals, and that was the most unjust thing they ever did. The Veterans Administration was put in 1921 by Warren Harding. Mm-hmm. by the way, the worst president we ever had. He never. The only thing he did in the White House was play poker or bring his women. And Warren Harding had the VFW, and they said, "What a wonderful thing." No, they asked for a pension, and guess what? He said, "No, it's too much money. We can't afford it." He shut them off. But he took the VA, and he put a friend in charge of it, and the friend in charge of it, over a short period, stole millions and millions of dollars away from it, and he was ripping. They did it. And the guy, I think he put 1 year in prison, and that's all he ever did. And Warren Harding, he had a Secretary of State, because he put all his own friends in there, that took the Elk Hill oil fields in California and the Teapot Dome oil fields and made them, put him in his control, and then started selling off the oil rights to drillers. He was the only cabinet member ever going to prison. So, and as far as Warren went, he went to Alaska, and when he came back, they said he died of a heart attack. He didn't die of a heart attack because I was alive during that period. And I remember my folks telling me later on that what happened to him, his wife poisoned him. The reason she got away with it, her father was a big politician with a lot of power who hated Harding. And going back to the other, since 2001 until now, they have never increased the hospitals. You've got all these people coming back. The hospitals don't have enough people to handle them. I worked 37 years in the government, and I went through the same thing. Every year they cut me 10%, no matter how much work I had. The more work I had, I had to find other ways to get rid of it. And so in the hospitals, they push things off, and that's what you have to do if you haven't got the manpower to get it. And in the VA, I turned around and I got a primary doctor because I used them for my ears and my earphones and stuff like that. And they called me up and they says, we have your primary doctor went into private practice. It took them a whole year to get another primary doctor for me, and it's not their fault. The Congress is not putting the money into those hospitals to get the best of doctors either, because they're the lowest paid, and that's why they keep leaving. So when they say the VA hospital's wrong, they're not. They're the victims. The ones that are wrong is Congress, because they should have foreseen that this was coming.
It's one of our longest wars, if not the longest war.
Yeah, because it never ends.
Yeah.
And if they had read history, which I love, they would have seen in history that we had a lot to do with it. If in Iran, we turned around and we got rid of the prime minister, right? We put Mohammed there, this guy named Mohammed. And Mohammed was doing great. He had the backing of Britain and America until he found out that the Iranian oil fields were really British Petroleum. And that all the big part of the profit was going to England and America. He turns around and put a stop to it. And because he did, they started a coup, and they had him killed. They put him in jail, and later on he was killed. And then later on, we're the ones who backed Hassan, because Hassan kept the Shiites of Iran and Syria apart, the Sunnis in the middle, and that they didn't go together and do what they do today. We took them for no reason at all and yanked them out. They did not do anything. They did not deserve us to blast away at them the way we did. And once we get rid of the ones that was the peacekeepers, really, all hell broke loose. So I don't think we should have ever done it, because I think your danger is the Shiites and coming into the two, because there's a big difference between the Shiites and the Sunnis. The Shiites are more into Muhammad, and the Sunnis are more into Allah. But that does not mean that all Muslims are bad, because I've met a lot of them, and they're really religious. And in Muslimism, in their religion, they don't believe in killing. They have 10 commandments just like we do, but you get groups that change the thinking. Just like in America, we get groups that get religious crazy and do the things they're not supposed to do. Yeah. Just like the kids that are going over there to fight, they're all mixed up.
Now, you said one last thing, but you said something when we did a little talk on the phone, and you were saying that when you talk to the high school children, that you want them to know that war is not glamorous and war is not fun.
First thing I tell them, we're talking about World War II, and anything you know about World War II being glamorous, that's a lie. That's a lie. War is hell. War rips apart more people than anything, and the only way you get through it is learning to handle it. You've got to learn how to handle war. I went through 13 major engagements. I fought in Africa, I fought in the Arctic, and the whole Pacific. And the whole thing is, I live for today, and I don't worry about tomorrow. And the same thing today. I don't worry about what's going to happen tomorrow. When tomorrow comes, I'll handle it. I only worry about today. And I don't even worry about today, because. And another thing, one of the biggest questions that kids ask me is, do I feel I lost almost 4 years of my life? I feel that the greatest thing that ever happened to me was going in the United States Navy, because when I went into the Navy, it taught me that I had more ability than I thought. I went through a depression. I thought the only thing I could do in life is what my father did, and I couldn't go any higher. I learned that by being in the Navy and studying and not being afraid to try, I could go up, and I did. I got to be. If I had stayed in, I would be a second-class gunner's mate, and pretty soon I would have gone right up the ladder. When I came back from the service, it was a dirty job, that railroad, because your hair's full of soot and I was still only a young guy. So I went in and I threw my pass down. And my uncle flipped. My father said, "You're stupid." The clerk that got it said, "You're a wacko. You're giving up a good job." And I said, "I hate it. I hate this job. I'm not going anyplace." They said, "What are you going to do?" I said, "I'm going to go out and I'm going to write." He says, "What are you going to do?" I said, "I'm going to go work for a newspaper." They said, "The Journal?" I says, "No, I'm going to go to New York, try to get on one of those papers." They said, "You can't do it." I got on a train. I went to New York. I got on the New York Sunday Journal, American Sunday Journal, and I worked for them. And all my lunch breaks, I hung around with the rewrite men. They're all ex-college professors, and I talked to them about it, and they taught me a lot. I would have stayed, but to get a pension in those days, you had to be in a union, and the union was a closed union, and you had to have a relative to speak for you. So after a while, I realized I wasn't going anyplace. I came back to Rhode Island, and I was going to try to get work here. I did. I got work with a chemist, and my mother says to me, "John, you've never taken chemistry." I said, I'll do it. I went there and I worked with him making semi-precious stones, and I was his helper. And then I got in touch with the photo engravers, and I was going to become a photo engraver. I had this thing all set up, and I asked them, "What is your pension?" They said, "We don't have a pension." But I had heard that the post office had civil service. I gave up them at a higher pay to go into a lower pay into the post office because after going through the Depression, I wanted a pension, and I got into them, and I went from a sub clerk to a clerk, to a foreman, to a superintendent, to a manager, and I finished up in Bristol as their postmaster. Why? because everyone says, you don't have the education. I says, I can do it. And I did it because I convinced myself I can do anything I try if I try. The only thing I can't do is what I'm afraid to try. They said, you'll never learn the computers. And it was in 2006 that Steve Jennings set me down at a computer and taught me how to use a computer. And today I still write newsletters, and I've been doing it since 1982 for the federal workers, federal retirees, and I do it all the time. And they say, you can't do it. Yes, I can. I can do anything. Anything in this world I can do if I'm not afraid to try. And so what I tell these kids, don't be afraid to try. I says, if you take an exam and fail, that's the best thing that can happen, because now you can go back and do it again. And you do it, keep doing it, and suddenly you'll find, boom, I'm on top. How did I get there? Because I wasn't afraid to try. And that's what I tell the kids. Two big things I tell them. War's bad. Don't be afraid to try anything. And don't hold in grudges that are going to kill you and not the people you hate. Them are the three. And I always tell them, remember, if you want to get ahead in this world, you work together. And to prove that, look at your football team. When they all work together, they win a game. Your hockey team, they get together and they really work together, they win. If they all go out and do it for themselves, they'll lose. So that's what I do to kids.
Well, I think that's a nice piece of 3 pieces of good advice, and it's a good place to end our interview.
By the way,
right now.
the reason I talk so much is I'm Irish. And my wife used to say to me, John, when we go out, I get sunburned. When you go out, you get tongue burned.
Well, thank you very much for
Okay.
your time and getting tongue burned here today with me.
Okay,
Thank you, John.
thank you.